Okay, here we go. So, our last class before spring break. You all know we're off next week, I'm sure. So today we continue on with audience measurement and a couple of different kinds of research as well that supplement audience measurement. So let's just take a quick review of what we did. Does anyone remember what the name of Nielsen's mechanical audience measurement system was back in the 1930s? Had a catchy name that they still actually use. Sounds like audience. It's heavily suggestive of audience measurement.
Wait, you said mechanical?
Mechanical, yeah.
As in like tracking...
Right. Remember they put a little device in people's radio too?
Oh, yeah.
The audiometer, right. Okay. Hey, Sarah. This is for you, so you can write on the paper. So this was, yes, Nielsen's audiometer. Now, given that it was in the 1930s, what medium would they have been measuring?
Radio.
Radio, right? Because TV didn't exist in 39. It came. TV didn't exist before that. Great. So that's the Nielsen audiometer, and so we talked about some other early forms of audience research. It's always been plagued by some kind of inaccuracy. It still is, even though we've moved to a more sophisticated system now. Let's say a lot of the early inaccuracies have been eliminated. We saw that they used to phone people up at home, and that wasn't very reliable in the different ways that they did it. In our current industry, we divide the country up into different areas that are measured in audience measurement. You remember what the acronym is for the most commonly used measurement? It's actually up here on this slide. You just have to pick it out. Which one's the most commonly used? Is it the DMA, the MSA, or the TSA? DMA. DMA is the most common one. Yeah. So DMA stands for Designated Market Area. So 210 DMAs in the United States. Now sometimes, Minneapolis, St. Paul will be one DMA. If you're in a massive one like LA, they may split it up a little bit on the edges. And here in San Francisco, SF Bay Area, DMA, we're the 5th largest radio market in the country. So the DMAs, now they divide them up, and print uses the same sort of thing, television uses the same sort of thing. The difference between the DMAs, the MSAs, and the TSAs are largely just a matter of geographic coverage a little bit. And they are of interest, for instance, to ad advertisers, ad buyers, and such, because the slightly different makeup of the area, depending on whether you're talking DMSA, MSA, or TSA, it just makes that area more or less interesting to advertisers. So they're measuring slightly different things. But so the DMA is the Designated Market Area. That means then that if you're in the SF Bay Area, they know the population, they know the demographic breakdown of the population. There's all kinds of other companies that are doing research, by zip code, by different marketing group. They know what kind of soft drinks people buy, in which zip code are most people buying Mercedes, and so on and so forth. They know education-wise. All of that stuff is focused around the DMA as, the kind of geographical unit. And because radio and television stations, local radio and television stations broadcast, over all the DMA or over part of it, then that's how they know about their audience. And so that's how the local stations are being surveyed to understand, what size of audience they have. So we mentioned that the instrument for radio research now, and some TV as well, is the diary system. But we mentioned also that there's some drawbacks on the diary system because it involves people having to report what they were listening to when, they may not remember and such. So moving to this new device, the portable people meter, the PPM, right? As I told you at length last class, it has shaken up the industry a little bit, given that most people only remembered the top 3 or 4 stations, and not surprisingly in the ratings game, the top 3 or 4 were clear winners and the rest were losers. But when switching to the portable people meter, that problem of people's memory only remembering a few top stations was eliminated, and instead what they found was that there was a much broader distribution of audience, meaning that there was no longer so clearly a few on top and the rest on the bottom. It was squished together, like putting a compressor on the signal. Everything was sort of in the same band, which made it a lot harder for local stations to say, we're number 1 with this demographic, you owe us more money for the advertising minutes. It was like, well, why don't we go with that other station? Their rating is almost as good as yours, and we've been going with you for years. Let's switch it up. Wow, that's freaked them all out, So, and I have that firsthand from some ex-students who are, in the advertising side of Entercom. So I found that fascinating as to, what that could do. Oh, and then we talked about ratings and share. So let's talk about that for a second. So the period, it's a little different from television to radio. We mentioned that in radio, the AQH, the average quarter hour, is a really key unit of measurement because people move around between different stations and jump back and forth to the station that's being rated. For instance, they don't like that song, they go somewhere else, but it's their favorite station. They come back because they want to hear the celebrity news or something. So there's a lot of movement in radio, so they measure within 15-minute segments. Television, it's a lot more stable. You start watching a show, so they do average viewers. They measure households using television on a program-by-program basis. So that's a different there. Now we looked at a hopefully funny video with Muppets that were talking about radio measurement in terms of 2 key concepts: rating, right, and and share. And I just want to go over again with you the difference between rating and share. So, first of all, Nielsen, looks to their panel of viewers to find out how many people actually watched a show on any given evening, and they would call that impressions. And whether we're talking about rating or about share, both of them begin with the actual number of impressions, which means basically like how many households tuned into that show. But then they calculate as their percentages a little bit different, right? In terms of rating, what goes on the bottom? What do we have? Universe, that's right, yeah. So whenever we are calculating rating, we're looking at the number of impressions, the number of households that actually watched a show, and we're looking for that as a percentage out of all of the possible households that could be using television on that night. They're called HUTs. So that would be your universe in broadcast. If you're ABC, CBS, or NBC, and they do these national ratings for the CW, they do these ratings for the networks. And their universe then is every household in the country that has a television set. But then there's another measurement which very often makes broadcasters look better, and this is the share. So in this case, still the same number of households that actually were watching, But instead of comparing that to the number of every single television set in the country, you're only comparing that to the number of households that had the TV on, which is going to be smaller than every possible household that does have television in the country, right? Because not everybody turns on the TV every night.
Does that account for households with multiple TVs? Every household is like considered one TV.
It's every household is considered one HUT, one household using TV, even if they've got 5 TV sets. But it's an interesting question because the Nielsen panels is quite expensive to wire up. Here's your den. You've got a TiVo. You've got a DVR. You've got a TiVo is a DVR. You've got a Blu-ray player. You've got regular broadcast TV. You've got OTT coming in. Somehow Nielsen has to be able to monitor all of that. Like they've got to gather data about what device were you actually watching. And that's complicated. So I would imagine for 5 TVs in a household or something like that, I don't know what they do. Whether they tell them, okay, just use the one TV, or whether they wire them all up. Hey, Tom, come on in. So this would be share, all right? So we used a pretty simple example, but let's say your universe was, 1 million households using television, and you had 100,000 that actually tuned in. You would be dividing a million by 100,000, and you'd come away ultimately with 10% here. And then we looked at, okay, still the same number of impressions, the same number of people tuned in, but let's say only 500,000 out of the million possible in your universe had the TV on. So in this case, you'd be looking at a nicer number, 20% share, because things look better, right? There's less people who had their TV on. So your number looks better, And it's reasonable also to say, why should we assess ourselves, just based on every household in the country versus let's just assess ourselves on every household that was actually, in our market watching TV on that night. And so HUT had TV on 20%. So that's the difference between ratings and share. In rating, we look at the number of impressions over the entire universe. In share, we look same number of impressions, but just over the smaller number of households that actually had TV on at that time. So estimate of people tuned in divided by number of people. Okay, so I hope that's reasonably clear. We did mention Nielsen does a bunch of different surveys. They have to serve the local TV and radio stations, which need to know on a week-by-week basis how they're doing in their DMA. So KTVU wants to know how they're doing against KPIX. They want to know how they're doing against Cron. So Nielsen does those regular rating surveys in each DMA. And then they do a National Television Index, or the NTI. I always thought it was national, but so this is the one that they do for the networks, which is, okay, how are these shows performing nationwide? And they have a small sample, but they bump that up to a larger national sample during 4 periods during the year. They call them the sweeps. You may have heard of sweeps. So at 4 different times, 4 weeks out of the year are designated sweeps. And at that time, they have a bigger panel nationwide. It's quite expensive. The more people you add to this, the more expensive it gets. And the broadcasters all know when the sweeps periods are, and they pour in, special features into their programming during the sweeps periods. For instance, there's one sort of mid-March, and you will see, in that period, they'll have special guests. They'll put on, juicy tie-ins with other, popular culture features. They'll have, like big singers on, or they'll do a stunting episode. That's, all of a sudden, a dramatic show will do a musical or something like that, something weird just to attract attention. The cable channels, which are competing, will do, their most popular, Simpsons marathon or a Shark Week or something like that. And they'll pour all of that into the sweeps period so that their ratings look better during that period. And not incidentally, at the end of March are the upfronts, which you may have forgotten by now, but those are the gigantic ad sales conventions that they do in New York and Miami, where each of the networks, announces what the fall shows will be and sells. CBS has lately been selling about $8 billion of advertising at the upfronts, and the other networks are, somewhere in that ballpark. So many billions of dollars of ads are sold immediately after the sweeps period, which usually, will define which network is the most popular with viewers. In mid-March, the data comes out just in time for the upfronts when they start selling like mad for everything that's coming out in the fall. So it kind of all connects together to suck the maximum advertising dollars out. So yeah, there are those sweeps periods, which are very influential. Oh yeah, and so a good point. One of the limitations of ratings, as we're discussing it here, is we really don't know why these people are watching, right? We can count the number of people and calculate as a percentage, but we don't get any feedback from them as to, I thought the show was great, or it was just the thing that sucked the least that was on that night, or, we don't know much about that. So we know the numbers, and we know, as I said, given the DMA population, we know certain things about them, their lifestyles, hobbies, and stuff. So we know, how old the people are who are watching in front of the TV. We know their gender, family composition, and then things like psychographics, which we turn to, other marketers who do different kinds of surveys there. Technographics, a fancy new word, but talking about people's attitudes towards technology. But it's all of a piece. And another part of the data that we would, it kind of, if you think about advertising, you've got, of course, we talked last week about agencies and creatives creating advertisements, right, that then get put into channels. So TV, radio, internet, or whatever, they reach audiences, right? And so then we do ratings. We see how big was the audience for a show. We even rate commercials, right? The C3, they talked about that in the video we saw last class. So you can pull just separate ratings. How many people watched my commercial? What were their ages? Stuff like that. We've got all that psychographic data about them, so it's helping us target and stuff. And then we've also got cash register data from, especially big box stores like Target, for instance, whatever. They sell all that data. So, if you pay with a card or something like that, they know that much more about you. And so, they'll know your zip code, for instance. So there may be laws against actually selling, by your name, but they can definitely know what zip code you're coming from. And so, I'm trying to make a picture of a circle here, which is in the advertising industry's dream, they would, create the ads based on the psychographics, and, they would know what you like. They'd put it in channels where you're likely to see it, and they would measure you as best they can, and then basically at the cash register, they would see, okay, wow, that new promotion did really, really well with the diaper buyers that I've been, targeting and such. And so they try as much as they can to close the circle there. You guys been following the news about, Facebook helped the Trump campaign, What do you think about that? Because when I was kind of underwhelmed because they've been doing that for a long, long time. The idea that a candidate is just the same as a product, in political advertising. Did you think is it so scandalous that that the Trump campaign had all this data? Yeah, Ron?
So it would come as a surprise. Like Facebook been advertising to us using our own data for many years ever since it's been made.
So you weren't surprised either?
I was surprised Trump had that much on us.
Okay.
But that's not really gonna influence my vote in any shape or form.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope we're all pretty conscious and critical media users, and especially, coming to a class or college and stuff. But some people can be, quite influenced by that stuff. Other thoughts about it? Anybody else? I had heard of a similar, what would call it, a strategy, a process, I don't know, not targeting Facebook, but LinkedIn. So this business of third parties basically scouring everybody's profile, finding out as much about them as possible, and then selling that information out to marketers or what. So if I did the current scandal involving Facebook and the company called Cambridge Analytica, which is an English company. But apparently what they managed to do was they created an app that asked people to log in using their Facebook credentials. And this was a few years back when Facebook security wasn't very good. So when somebody did that, when they used their Facebook login to get into the app furnished by a third party, they opened up all of their Facebook profile and all of their friends' profiles as well to the third-party app maker. So by doing that and getting about 250,000 people logging into that app with their Facebook credentials, that opened the door for that third party to get all of that information on the Facebook profiles and stuff like that, from which they built a service, which allowed political advertisers and probably anybody else to target based on what they learned from those profiles. So, I think my surprise way back when, hearing that you could do this with LinkedIn, without LinkedIn's permission either. And I'm sure they've since fixed that problem a long time ago, as Facebook had eliminated, the way that Cambridge Analytica got into, you can't do that now, and you couldn't do it for the last couple of years. Anyhow, I think the surprise was not that, hey, Facebook has all this about me or LinkedIn does, but that somebody else could go and get it without their permission and then use it, and sell it. But it's really just being targeted, whether it's Facebook selling to the Trump campaign or Cambridge Analytica. You're still just being targeted, based on the same data that we willingly give up. Well, okay. Back to back to research, right? Couple of new things. Believe it or not, that was sort of a review of what we came to before. For those of you, so we did say that ratings and share, they only give us numbers. They don't tell us why people like stuff. There is qualitative, we would call this quantitative research because it deals with quantities of audience. There's also qualitative research which deals with the quality of their experience. And you can turn to that to find out more about why they like what they watch. So really, this just tells us how many, but this type of research tells us why they like it. It's much harder to do, and you get much smaller sample sizes with more limited kinds of data. But it's used in radio, for instance, to pick new songs out. And in big markets, some radio stations will still get together, like a few hundred people in a ballroom or something in a hotel, and they'll play them back clips, new songs, or if they're thinking of getting a new morning show or a new format, they will get in their faithful audience, and they'll attract them with promises of we'll give you t-shirts, we'll give you bumper stickers, merch, crap, and people come out for that. And then they play them clips. And you like this song? Would you like to hear this type of music more often? Or you like this DJ? Would you like to hear this DJ more often? This must be just terrible. I thought I silenced this damn thing. There we go. So that's called qualitative research. They play song hooks as well. And sometimes they'll even do, there were systems that would phone you up at home and play you that kind of thing as well. Now a lot of that's moved to the internet. So if you give your email address to like a radio station website or something, they'll put you on a list, and then they may, approach you and say, hey, you want to be part of our listening thing? And you go to a website and you can listen to different samples and stuff, small prizes or something like this. So it's basically if the radio product is music, these are small, product research types of thing. But you find out a lot more about why something is clicking with an audience or not. In television, yeah. So in Las Vegas especially, there's a couple of movie theaters that are wired up for audience research. So they have like they have a thing with a dial, and the more you like it, you turn it to the right. You don't like it, you turn it to the left. Tom, you're nodding. Have you ever done one of those?
Exactly.
Have you ever done one of those?
No, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They give them out to a select number of people.
Right.
What is that? The ratings, right?
Yeah, the more you like it. Well, these are qualitative, so it's not like the Nielsen ratings. So these are different companies that they specializes in places where people go on holiday because they have some free time, and it's like, hey, you hang out until 2 o'clock, and we'll show you some new shows that you've never seen before, and we'll take your votes and we'll give you like a bag full of junk at the end of it or something. And so people who are on vacation with nothing to do figure, oh yeah, I'll hang out another half hour and do that kind of thing. So they do it, and as they watch, there's these little knobs they twist to say I like it, I don't like it, and they also, and you fill in a little questionnaire like how old are you, all the things that they want to know typically, that Nielsen wants to know as well, is like age, gender, education, and such, and then you twist the knob and they find out more about you there. Did you like the plot, so on and so forth. They do this for movies and change the end of the movie, because they're so expensive that they'll allow the research to drive the end of the movie sometimes. So that was just a quick look at those other kinds of research that are possible, apart from the big Nielsen ratings of audience. So now here's a fresh bit of math that thrills us all, but it's not that complicated, really. When you're an advertiser or a company with a product that you want to advertise and you go work with a media buyer, you typically don't just buy in one medium, like on radio. You might if you're like a local mattress company or Sleep Train or something like that or whatever. But if you're a national advertiser, Toyota, let's say, you're going to have magazine ads, you're going to have web ads, you're going to have television and radio ads. You've got everything, right? And so it's a complex process of figuring out who you want to reach and what is the best channel and what is the most economical way to do it. And we don't go anywhere into all that complexity, but one concept which helps them the most is called CPM, cost per, and the M is mil, which is French, maybe Latin, for 1,000. It's definitely French for 1,000. Is it Italian as well, Sarah? Mil? Mil is, how do you say 1,000 in Italian?
Million. Mille.
Mille. And you would write it M-I-L-L-E?
Yes.
That's it. Same in French, mille. Stands for 1,000. So I don't know why they've got that in there, but CPM stands for cost per 1,000 viewers or impressions, because it could be a reader whose impression from a print ad as well. So what that means is then you could look up media and you could say, well, how much is it going to cost me to reach 1,000 people on television? Maybe in the $20. How much is it going to cost me to reach 1,000 people through, People magazine or something like that hardly anybody reads, but you've got a good targeted group that will pick it up in the grocery store. It's probably going to be like $2.50, $3. How much will it cost me to reach 1,000 on the internet? 25 cents or something like that. But you can look them up, Google them, CPM, and you'll find, some business magazines like Forbes especially have pretty good, or Adweek, which is behind a paywall, the really juicy stuff. But you can find the actual numbers for this. But definitely TV is in the $20 range. So what it does is it just tells you how much it costs to reach 1,000 people. So that's that's how you basically can compare. It's like, whoa, I really want to reach this group of people, but I have to do it through TV. That's going to be expensive. Well, they better be worth it to me, you know, because I can't reach them any other way. Versus the web, it's like, it's full of click fraud. I mean, it's full of, you know, we don't know who we're going to hit. So we're not going to pay a lot of money for that. So that's what CPM is, basically. CPM, cost per mil, cost per thousand. And that's basically how they compare media when they're buying it. I have a video about online. Online is made more complex, and it's problematic, not just for a poor professor trying to teach it, but also for anyone trying to assess the internet audience. And there's television, the internet, counting online ad exposures. Okay, there are so many ways that audience activity on the internet can be measured. So this is one of the problems. When you are, let's say you're an advertiser trying to figure out where should I buy? You know, should I buy on these websites? Should I buy, through Google? I mean, what's the best way? And there are many different kind of measurements. So there are different companies that measure. For instance, ComScore is a big one. Nielsen itself, through acquisitions, is also fighting in this space because remember, they want to be all things to everybody. They are in broadcasting. They'd love to do it in the internet. Each of them does things in a different way, and even within the same company, they can have different measurements. Sometimes, for instance, they'll do a sample just like they do in broadcasting. So they'll have, recruit 10,000 people and put software in their laptop that measures, every website that they visit. Sometimes they'll do, different approaches. And the samples are going to be different. So whereas Nielsen, let's say ComScore does a sample and Nielsen does a sample, they're going to be different. And they're going to each come up with a different score for different websites. And then as an advertiser, you're going to have to say, well, do I trust this one? Do I trust this one? Which one is better? And as a, for instance, a group of internet websites or something, which are, one thing you'll find in the blog world or whatever is something called an ad network, which is, there are various companies out there, there are various ad networks that are actually, like they're in the billion-dollar valuation, some of them. What this is let's say you start a blog and you'd like to sell advertising. You can go through Google, which, with their service is virtually automated. That's one way to go. Another way to go is to band together with other blogs or websites or such, and as a network of blogs or of websites, let's say 100 strong, you start to develop an audience which is big enough. You put all the 20,000 go to this blog, 50,000 go to this blog, 100,000 goes to this website. When you put them all together, you're starting to get a pretty sizable audience, And so the ad network can bundle together all of these different smaller audiences and sell them more efficiently that way, and thus compete with Google and compete with other, big ad sales companies. So that is something you'll find online. So, basically the difficulty is there are different companies, they organize their research in different ways, they come up with slightly different data, slightly different knowledge they can offer, and you're kind of wondering, like, which one would I pay attention to? So in addition to that, they evaluate websites based on some or all of these different activities. So the hits, it just means, did someone visit your site? Did some internet browser call out and your page was loaded up somewhere? Was it a bot that did it? Not a real person? So that's one way that hits can be very fraudulent. So then there's all kinds of efforts made to try to detect that and get around it. So getting impressions through hits it's pretty cheap because it's not very reliable. You don't, again, know, like, was there even a person really doing that? Cost per click, it's a little bit more interesting. Somebody cared enough to click on an ad and pull, call out to get the information that's in the ad. So there's something called pay per click, which means that you only pay as an advertiser if someone clicks on that display ad. That also could be faked, but efforts have been made to kind of weed out what is real audience activity. And then cost per transaction, this is where you don't pay as an advertiser unless someone actually buys something. So this is kind of the gold standard because then you really know that your ad led to some kind of action. So clearly this would be the most expensive type of ad buy because most of the action, the hits, and even if someone clicked through but didn't buy something, you wouldn't get paid for that. You'd only get paid when some kind of transaction was initiated. So that's cool. And you can also buy, for some sites, cost per 1,000. So you can just like that CPM that we were talking about is an actual thing that you buy. So you can do that too. In all of this, I think the interest, despite all the fraud and the possibilities of, the difficulties of working in the digital space, it's of course more and more popular. The rates tend to be lower than for, the CPMs. It costs less on average than television. Radio is still a bargain. So despite the difficulties of working in this place, it is popular. So, yeah. There's also different ways to make this more enticing. So for instance, this one, the cooperative advertising buy, is interesting. That's when, for instance, Toyota teams up with the local dealer and says, okay, we want to put out a lot of ads. We're going to pay Toyota, the national car company, out of their national advertising budget, we're going to pay half for all of the local ads that you place to promote this new car. So we call that cooperative advertising when the manufacturer cooperates with the local sales at the local sales level to get advertising out there. So that can make it continually, more interesting for a local advertiser if part of the ad buy is paid for by another company. Whoa, this is getting pretty thick. We got another video to watch in a sec. Let me just talk a moment about ad exchanges. So the biggest of these would be Google AdSense. I keep mentioning it. So what that is on a website, there are, of course, you're selling different parts of your website where, okay, we're going to have a skyscraper ad over here. Who wants to buy that, right? Well, you can sell that the old way by, having a sales team who calls up, says, you want some of a placement on our website? Well, totally cool. But you can also sell it through ad exchanges, which are ubiquitous in online. This is where you would say, okay, I've got this space here. I'm going to partner up with Google, and I'm going to sell this space on an auction basis every time someone comes to my page. So this can happen in split seconds as the page is loading up. You don't even know it. This space is here. The page is loading up, and the signal goes out, says, who wants this space? We'll auction it off to you. What I can tell you about the person who's loading this page in this split second is that, there's cookies in their browser for having visited Amazon and looked for tennis shoes. and gone to footlocker.com and something else, and I can show you all the cookies that are out there, right? There's hundreds of cookies in this person's site, and you can look at the last couple of days, and you can decide if you want to pay, you're going to bid highest so you can put your footwear in this space. And this happens within a split second while the page is loading up. Before the rest of your content is even in there, some bot has bought this space based on the information that's in your cookies. So that's why, mysteriously, I don't know if you ever had the experience, you were looking at, I don't know, a new piece of audio hardware or something, and the minute you close that out, then everything else you do, this ad is showing up there all the time, right? I mean, so that's how it works. So I think most people are now aware of it, but it still is kind of spooky that, it's like, I just got looking through 2-3 things, and now I'm just being hit constantly with these ads. Like, it's kind of crazy. So, to sum up a little bit, but there's more in this video that we can watch, is, some of the challenges are that, there are different companies. They're not just Nielsen. There's a whole bunch of different companies that do assessment. Their sample, the audiences that they research are all slightly different. The kinds of activities that they focus on are different too. So you come up with, different audience measurements for any given site or ad network. You're going to have different numbers, and that makes it much harder to agree upon how much the advertising is actually worth. So here we go. So let's look at, there's a very good, I like Filmmaker IQ. They have a lot of good practical stuff about how to make special effects, kind of on the budget. We watched one in the audio class about doing ADR. They do a good job. So this one is about audience measurement, and they delve into also online streaming platforms and stuff like that. This could be interesting, and it's pretty well done. So let's check this out. And that way I stop talking.
This Filmmaker IQ lesson is proudly sponsored by Rode Microphones, premium microphones and audio accessories for studio, live, and location recording. Hi, welcome to FilmmakerIQ.com. I'm John Hess, and today we'll set out on the task of answering the question, how do you measure an audience? The most obvious way to measure an audience is to count up all the tickets that were sold at the box office. Now, for a stage play, this is not exactly rocket science. You just add up the receipts of that night's showing. But for a major motion picture release that's playing in 4,000 screens across the country and even around the world, well, this can get a little bit more tricky. The basics are still the same. Each movie theater would count up the receipts and then report to the distributor that day's take. Now, since the movie viewer is the end of our sales line once he or she buys the ticket, we talk about the audience in terms of dollars rather than tickets sold. Now, with real-time tracking systems installed in most theaters, a distributor takes this gross revenue data from all the movie theaters and adds them up to see how much a movie makes, say, over opening weekend. But wait a minute, you always hear about which movie won the weekend at the box office on Sunday morning, before the weekend is even over. Where do those numbers come from? Well, actually, those are estimates. Each studio has a particular formula for estimating the weekend haul based on historical data, comparing the movie that's in theater right now to a similar movie that was released at a similar time of year with a similar advertising budget. If we know Friday and Saturday's take, we can make a fairly accurate estimate of what Sunday's take will be. Then, on Monday morning, or Monday afternoon that is, the actual numbers are totaled and printed in trade journals. So why go through all that trouble? Well, one reason was to account for some of the movie theaters that didn't have real-time tracking. Previously, only 90% of American and Canadian theaters were tracked by Rentrack and Nielsen EDI. But in 2009, Rentrack bought up Nielsen EDI, becoming the sole provider of real-time, or at least near real-time, box office receipts, and now boasts a coverage of 99% of all theaters in the US and Canada. These results are purchased by the studios, and yet they still release box office predictions before the weekend is over. Why? Well, the answer may be buzz. Having the figures for the weekend box office gives Monday morning news programs something to talk about, which in turn makes it to the water cooler conversations, and boom, you just generate some free word of mouth advertising for your film. But while we're on the subject of the box office, let's try to figure out what some of these industry terms mean. Now, this is a topic that can get extremely dense, and we'll probably do a video on budgetary numbers at some point, but I want to give you just a taste. So when you see these numbers, there's at least a little bit of context. And because there's a lot of money at stake, take these percentages and averages with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of creative accounting going on. And when the numbers are announced, they are gross numbers. That is the total amount of revenue generated before any expenses are subtracted. The first in line to get a cut of that gross is the exhibitor, the movie theater itself. Now, historically, in negotiating with a distribution company, a theater would determine its base cost of running the theater, called the nut. Then a sliding scale was negotiated, so the distributor gets the majority share on opening weekend, upwards of 90% of the gross, and falling 10% every weekend. This creates an incentive for the studios to drive audiences to see a film on opening weekend, while incentivizing exhibitors to hold movies in theaters as long as possible, as they would make a bigger chunk of the movie ticket price on older movies. But with the shortening of the release window and competition between video on demand and streaming, recently exhibitors have moved more toward a split based on national box office results, with a straight up split between 48 and 63% of the box office. The better the sales, the more the distributor takes. The result is movies go in and out of theaters quicker and pay off faster. 80% of the box office revenue for a film is generated in the first 2 weeks of the release. Now, because theaters are only making half on the movie ticket price, the real money in the theater business comes from the rather large markup on concession stand items. Popcorn and soda cost mere pennies to make, but the theater gets to keep 100% of those profits. So when you look at how much money a movie grosses, the first thing you have to do is cut that basically in half. That's how much the distributor gets. But wait, we're not even close to finding the net profit yet. According to Baseline Intelligence, a research firm for the entertainment industry, the 6 major studios spent an average of $37 million per picture for print and advertising in the year 2009. Now, that's only an average. The major tentpole films can spend upwards of $85 million. The print side, the P of the industry abbreviation P&A, covers the cost of creating actual film prints for distribution. 35mm film prints can range from $1,000 to $3,000 a piece, depending on the length of the film and the quality of the print. For a wide distribution of, say, 4,000 theaters, well, that can add up really fast, even with the quantity discounts that a studio can muster. Which is why, to the chagrin of Quentin Tarantino and Christopher Nolan, studios are pushing so hard for digital projection. According to the MPAA, traditional projectors make up 81% of the US market in 2009. But 4 years later, in 2013, that number is down to just 7.5%. The fast move to digital almost mirrors that of sound conversion and speed. Although digital's drive was cost savings, and sound was a new dimension in storytelling. Still, prints only make up about 10% of P&A. The rest of that money is spent on advertising, and this is where it can get really complicated, even if not creative, with the numbers. In an increasingly media-saturated world, you really have to create near instant brand awareness of a film in just a matter of a couple weeks. And the only way to do that is through a well-crafted advertising strategy involving television, social media, and even billboard advertising. How that money is spent is where studios can inflate costs. For one, many studios are part of larger media conglomerates. Paramount is a subsidiary of Viacom, which owns CBS and a host of other cable channels. So buying airtime for a Paramount film from CBS is almost a money shell game with really no limit on the price. Well, creative accounting aside, according to Larry Gilbrandt, who wrote in The Hollywood Reporter, accounting that an average of 55% of a domestic sales go into exhibitors' pockets, the average 2009 movie release, again, we're talking about averages, had to do a gross of $186 million in domestic box office in order to recoup production and P&A costs. And that's not counting the percentages taken up by deals struck by producers, stars, and production companies. Now remember, these are all averages, but $186 million domestically is not something that the vast majority of movies are able to accomplish. But don't shed a tear for the studios just yet. There are several other windows for studios to earn money. First, through international box office receipts, which can sometimes dwarf domestic. Then through DVD, Blu-ray, streaming, video on demand, merchandising, and of course, licensing for television. I find it rather ironic that when television first hit the entertainment scene back in the 1950s, the movie studios hunkered down to do battle against this device that kept people at home and away from the theater. And then only a few years later, television became the savior of the movie business as a way to generate even more revenue. Well, TV signals are broadcast through the air from a broadcasting tower. Anyone with an antenna, and now a digital decoder, can pick up the signal and watch. So how do we determine how big a TV audience is? Well, that question plagued Arthur C. Nielsen. In 1923, Nielsen started his company AC Nielsen with the purpose of selling engineering performance surveys. Soon his company was in the business of creating market research reports. In 1932, Nielsen began to track food and drug transactions, giving brands a way to determine their share of the whole market. The term market share, your piece of the industry, was coined at the Nielsen Company. In 1942, after the purchase of Autometer, Nielsen begins to track the popularity of radio station programs using sample of 1,000 homes. In 1950, Nielsen begins a service with television audiences. Now, a question you might have initially is how can a sample size of only 1,000 or so homes generate an accurate report of a population of, say, 10 million TV sets? Well, the answer to that is statistics. Obviously, the larger your sample size, the more accurate your results will be. If we poll the entire population, we will get a perfect breakdown. In theory. But polling an entire population isn't plausible for cost and time reasons, so we have to take a sample. Without getting too deep in the math, if your sample is truly random and free from bias, then you can calculate the margin of error, and in turn, it turns out that you really don't need that big a sample to get a margin of error down to 1 to 2%. But that's only if your sample is truly random, and that's not necessarily an easy task to accomplish. So to track television viewing habits, Nielsen relied on two methods of reporting. The first were diaries. These were paper logs of what you watched and how long you watched over a period of a week. But as you can imagine, diaries are prone to error, people forgetting to input data and even downright cheating and falsely reporting their viewing habits. The second method Nielsen used were set meters. These were devices installed on TVs of Nielsen families that recorded the use of the television and would telephone home base with the results every night. Now, set meters could record minute-by-minute data to track the viewing habits of a household without error. But the meter didn't know who, if anyone, was watching, only that the TV was on. In the 1980s, Nielsen added the people meter, which could now track the viewing habits of different individuals in a household. In the 1990s, the portable people meter came out, which listens for radio, television, and cable audio to report back, with the latest generation using wireless cell phone signals. Unfortunately, in a terrible missed opportunity, they made them black, so we'll never have the pleasure of saying one-eyed, one-horned, portable purple people meter. When you see Nielsen ratings for a national TV show, they are broken down into three figures: rating point, share, and viewers watching. In 2013, there was an estimated 115.6 million television households in the United States, called the universe. A national rating point is 1% of that, or 1.16 million households. To determine the rating point, we divide the number of viewers, called impressions, by the universe. In other words, a rating point is the average percentage of people watching of all possible TVs. The second part is the share. That is the percentage of televisions that were in use during the time we're trying to measure. The share will always be higher than the rating. Viewers watching is an estimate based on how many people are watching per household. Now, this can vary from program to program. Imagine the difference between viewers per household of a latest guilty pleasure reality show versus an event sports game like the Super Bowl. Here's a real world example. Let's say we have a show that's airing at 8 p.m. on CBS. Its national rating is 2.8 with a 9 share, with an estimated 10.64 million viewers. That means 2.8% of all televisions are tuned into that program, which represents 9% of all televisions that are turned on at that hour. Now, let's compare that same channel to, say, 10 p.m., which has a rating of 3.4 and a 10 share, but only an estimated 9.29 million viewers. The number of viewers is down, and the share is higher because some of the people turned off their TV and went to bed. Of those people that are still watching, 10% are tuned into that channel, up from 9% at 8 p.m. But this only applies to viewers watching live. What about time shift watching, like on a DVR? Well, for this, Nielsen adds 3 more streams of data. There's live, live plus same day, and live plus 7 days. Services like TiVo have deals with Nielsen to provide this data to be included in their measurements. So now, what are sweeps? Well, the term dates back to 1954. Remember those paper diaries? Nielsen just didn't have the manpower to log all the paper diaries across the nation at the same time. Currently, they send out roughly 2 million of them in 210 television markets. So what they did was sample viewing habits for 1 week, 4 times a year, but stagger their sampling by territory, starting with the East Coast and then sweeping west over a period of 4 weeks. So Sweeps Week is really a national 4-week affair that occurs in February, May, July, and November. Well, if these were the months that were being sampled, broadcasters quickly realized that it was to their benefit to get the highest rating during these few months before the diaries had to be turned back in. Now, why go through all the trouble of measuring the size of TV audiences? The answer is money. Advertising rates. The higher the rating, the more money a network can ask for an advertising on a particular show. Each 30-minute block of television contains 8 minutes of commercials. 6 of those minutes are dedicated to national advertisers. Their price is locked in with the national rating and share metrics. The remaining 2 minutes are dedicated to local market advertising, and those rates are determined by Sweeps Week. Now, as I've grown accustomed to saying, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to television metrics. There's data on commercial viewership, and ratings can be broken down along geographic and demographic lines. But the TV landscape is changing. It's changing fast, as more and more media is now being consumed through the internet. Computers are quite simply amazing things for communication. All those problems we had with counting tickets at the box office or logging paper diaries at Nielsen are completely avoided with computers who can tirelessly sit and count views 24/7. Online video on demand services like Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon can track your profile and know exactly what you watch, how long you watch it, when you watch, the ads you click on, etc., etc., etc. The information age isn't about information being at your fingertips. It's about using information we gather about you and what we do with it. But since you are paying for those legal streaming sites, there's not really a lot of incentive on your part to inflate your view count. But that's different when it comes to a monetized platform like YouTube. YouTube's parent company, Google, has been in a battle with black hat SEO and spammers for a long time. Google wants to make a better experience for the web user while serving you advertising, while black hat SEO and spammers want to generate as many clicks for a quick financial gain regardless of your user experience. On YouTube, views are like currency, and they really become currency through advertising. So inflating your view count means wasting advertising dollars and unhappy advertisers. Generally tight-lipped about what exactly constitutes a view, YouTube has gone on record defining a view as a video request generated by an actual viewer who got what they wanted and had a good user experience. So videos that are set to autoplay on a website will not count because no user actively requested it. Now things get a little more complicated. When you upload a video to YouTube, copies of it are cached in servers all around the world. That way a person, say India, who requests your video can contact their local Google server rather than having to call up a server that's halfway across the globe. Now, much like box office we talked about earlier, periodically each local Google server will call it the central view count server and report in on how many people watched that video. The central view count server adds up all the views and displays it on the site. Well, that is until it hits 300. Currently, there are hundreds of hours of video being uploaded to YouTube every minute, and that number keeps going higher. Now, honestly, the vast majority of those videos will not do more than 100 views or so. Even if monetization is enabled, these channels won't make a penny through advertising, so we really don't have to worry about using precise view counting on those videos. But once a video reaches 300 views, YouTube begins to take notice and apply a stricter algorithm to verify that indeed those views are coming from legitimate sources, that they are user requested and not tricked into clicking on it. And that's why you often see a video hit 301 plus and then sit there for a few hours while the server goes back and verifies the views. Views are still being counted during this process, but not shown publicly. Eventually the server catches up and the views are counted using this new, stricter counting algorithm. From box office to television metrics and finally internet tracking data, we've just begun barely touching on the science of measuring an audience. Now, people develop full careers just on this stuff alone, and these statistics have the power to move millions of dollars in determining what gets greenlit and what doesn't. That's the power of the audience. Now that the tools of media creation are getting better and cheaper, having an audience is becoming more and more crucial. But in the end, they still just want to watch and experience something great. I'm John Hess. I'll see you at filmmakeriq.com.
There we go. Talk about an efficient way of wrapping all that up. Yeah. Here we go. Still log in if you want. 15 questions. Are we ready? We are. Nielsen's audiometer was first used to measure which of the following? Correct answer, radio station listeners in the 1930s. Okay. 3 people got? Okay. So just remember, when Nielsen came around, there was no TV yet. What does DMA stand for? All right, well, the majority got it right. For its designated market area. Designated market areas. Let's see what... People were fooled by Digital Marketing Association. Nope. So the DMA is that geographic area that is being surveyed in the local ratings. Way to go. In a 1 million television household area, that's your universe, COPS is seen in 150,000 homes. What is its rating? All right, well, some people got it. Rating 15. We will review the math again before the exam. Let's do that, because boy, we're tired of all this now. All right, radio station ratings often measures audience in terms of what? All right, way to go. Average quarter hour, right? As we said, in radio, people tend to flip channels a lot and then come back to the original station that they flipped away from. So doing it every 15 minutes makes more sense in radio. Okay, if a spot advertisement costs $100 and reaches 1,000 people, what is its CPM? So remember, CPM stands for cost per 1,000 people. Woohoo! All right. So if the cost per 1,000 is $100 and it reaches 1,000 people, that means it's $100, right? CPM stands for cost per 1,000. So if I'm asking you, 1,000 people, how much does that cost? $100. Next up. When Ford pays for half of a local car dealer's advertising, it is known as what? What kind of ad deal is that? All right, that was a cooperative advertising. It's a cooperation between the national manufacturer and the local, sales division or whatever it is. Those two are cooperating. So that's cooperative advertising. Woo! What is the PPM? What does that stand for? All right, how'd we do? Whoa, poorly. Okay. As they showed us in the video that we just watched, the people meter was the box in the household where people would enter in, I'm person number 1 and I'm watching right now. The portable people meter is the one that you can take with you wherever you go. So PPM stands for portable people meter, PPM. Question 8, diary responses can be inaccurate, but ratings based on metering devices fixed all those problems. Is that true? Are we now without problems? All right, false. The majority got it. Nielsen still has plenty of headaches, even with the PPM, even if it's not so much even if you don't need to remember what you were listening to, there's still plenty of problems, as we said. Ad exchangers are most common in which medium? In which medium do we see ad exchangers? All right, woo! Way to go. Unanimous. It's the internet, yes. Because that's where you can have those little auctions, dynamic auctions. All right, during 4 weeks out of the year, Nielsen sends diaries to sample homes across the country. What's that called? What's that period called? Remember, 4 times a year, it gets staggered across the country. They get those ads. Okay, it is the sweeps period. So remember, they sweep across the country 4 times a year, gathering the national data. Question 11, ratings explain why viewers and listeners prefer certain programs over others. Is that true or false? The ratings explain why people like what they like. All right, the majority got it. So ratings actually just tell us how many people watched what they watch and a little bit about who they are, but not why they watched it. For that, we need qualitative research. Barring an unlikely event, shares are always larger than ratings. Whoa, equally divided. That's not good. So remember, a rating is based on, what you're doing is you're comparing the number of impressions to the entire universe, versus when you're taking a share, you're comparing the number of impressions to just the number of people who were actually watching. So the number of people who are actually watching is always going to be less than the universe itself. So in calculating the share, you're always going to have a better looking percentage. You're going to get more points, look better. So that one is true. Which of these is an actual audience measurement challenge faced by online advertisers? Do they have all of these? Well, perhaps. Because there are different ways of counting website visitors. There are different metering techniques used, And there are different means of sample selection. So all of it may add up to, all right, the answer was all of these. They're all a problem. And 14, which of the following is used to set online advertising rates? We didn't quite get to this. Well, we read the list, but I didn't put any emphasis on this. So this one's tough. Let's skip, because we're at the end of our time anyway. We're going to skip. Whoa, but 2 people got it. Way to go. The number of hits per page, the number of costs per clicks, or the cost per transaction. All of those are valid ways that advertising rates are set. Other stuff wasn't mentioned. Last one. Audience activity is more important than audience size in mobile or social media ad. Boom. 5 people got it right. Almost, yeah, good result, guys. Good guess, or maybe you know it for a fact. But yeah, the big thing that web advertising can offer is audience engagement. You're actually seeing what people are doing versus TV ads. You know, they saw the ad, but after that, you don't know very much. All right, good job, those at the podium. Nice. And we're all done. So we are going to wish you a good spring break. We'll see you back in a week. Have fun. Watch your media.